Chapter 2. How King Valoroso got the crown, and Prince Giglio went without. Paphlagonia, 10 or 20,000 years ago, appears to have been one of those kingdoms where the laws of succession were not settled, for when King Savio died, leaving his brother regent of the kingdom, and guardian of Savio's orphan infant, this unfaithful regent took no sort of regard of the late monarch's will, had himself proclaimed sovereign of Paphlagonia under the title of King Valoroso 24, had a most splendid coronation, and ordered all the nobles of the kingdom to pay him homage. So long as Valoroso gave them plenty of balls at court, plenty of money, and lucrative places, the Paphlagonian nobility did not care who was king, and as for the people, in those early times they were equally indifferent. The Prince Giglio, by reason of his tender age at his royal father's death, did not feel the loss of his crown and empire. As long as he had plenty of toys and sweetmeats, a holiday 5 times a week, and a horse and gun to go out shooting when he grew a little older, and above all the company of his darling cousin, the king's only child, poor Giglio was perfectly contented, nor did he envy his uncle the royal robes and sceptre, the great, hot, uncomfortable throne of state, and the enormous cumbersome crown in which that monarch appeared from morning till night. King Valoroso's portrait has been left to us, and I think you will agree with me that he must have been sometimes rather tired of his velvet, and his diamonds, and his ermine, and his grandeur. I shouldn't like to sit in that stifling robe with such a thing as that on my head. No doubt the Queen must have been lovely in her youth, for though she grew rather stout in after life, yet her features, as shown in her portrait, are certainly pleasing. If she was fond of flattery, scandal, cards, and fine clothes, let us deal gently with her infirmities, which, after all, may be no greater than our own. She was kind to her nephew, and if she had any scruples of conscience about her husband's taking the young prince's crown, consoled herself by thinking that the king, though a usurper, was a most respectable man, and that at his death Prince Giglio would be restored to his throne, and share it with his cousin, whom he loved so fondly. The Prime Minister was Glumboso, an old statesman, who most cheerfully swore fidelity to King Valoroso, and in whose hands the monarch left all the affairs of his kingdom. All Valoroso wanted was plenty of money, plenty of hunting, plenty of flattery, and as little trouble as possible. As long as he had his sport, this monarch cared little how his people paid for it. He engaged in some wars, and of course the Paphlagonian newspapers announced that he had gained prodigious victories. He had statues erected to himself in every city of the empire, and of course his pictures placed everywhere, and in all the print shops. He was Valoroso the magnanimous, Valoroso the victorious, Valoroso the great, and so forth, for even in these early times courtiers and people knew how to flatter. This royal pair had one only child, the Princess Angelica, who you may be sure was a paragon in the courtiers' eyes, in her parents', and in her own. It was said she had the longest hair, the largest eyes, the slimmest waist, the smallest foot, and the most lovely complexion of any young lady in the Paphlagonian dominions. Her accomplishments were announced to be even superior to her beauty, and governesses used to shame their idle pupils by telling them what Princess Angelica could do. She could play the most difficult pieces of music at sight. She could answer any one of Mangnall's questions. She knew every date in the history of Paphlagonia and every other country. She knew French, English, Italian, German, Spanish, Hebrew, Greek, Latin, Cappadocian, Samothracian, Aegean, and Crim-Tartar. In a word, she was a most accomplished young creature, and her governess and lady-in-waiting was the severe Countess Gruffanuff. Would you not fancy from this picture that Gruffanuff must have been a person of highest birth? She looked so haughty that I should have thought her a princess at the very least, with a pedigree reaching as far back as the deluge. But this lady was no better born than many other ladies who give themselves airs, and all sensible people laughed at her absurd pretensions. The fact is, she had been maid-servant to the Queen when Her Majesty was only princess, and her husband had been head footman. But after his death or disappearance, of which you shall hear presently, this Mrs. Gruffanuff, by flattering, toadying, and wheedling her royal mistress, became a favourite with the Queen, who was rather a weak woman, and Her Majesty gave her a title, and made her nursery governess to the princess. And now I must tell you about the princess's learning and accomplishments, for which she had such a wonderful character. Clever Angelica certainly was, but as idle as possible. Play at sight, indeed! She could play 1 or 2 pieces, and pretend that she had never seen them before. She could answer 6 of Mangnall's questions, but then you must take care to ask the right ones. As for her languages, she had masters in plenty, but I doubt whether she knew more than a few phrases in each for all her presents. And as for her embroidery and her drawing, she showed beautiful specimens, it is true, but who did them? This obliges me to tell the truth, and to do so I must go back ever so far, and tell you about the Fairy Blackstick. End of Chapter 2.